Jane Goodall has lived two very distinct lives. The first part of her life was spent exploring and encountering chimpanzees as no human has ever done before. The second part of her life is being spent exchanging her belief that we need to save the chimpanzees and the earth from man himself. Animals were Jane Goodall's passion for as long as she could remember. When she was 10 years old, she read Dr. Dolittle and Tarzan of the Apes. She fell in love with Tarzan. Goodall became very jealous of his wife. That was when her dream started. When she grew up, she believed that she would go to Africa, live with animals, and write books about them. That is how it all began. Before Jane Goodall, knowledge of the chimpanzee was widely based on speculation. Prior to Goodall, no one even got close enough to the chimps to study them. Her big break came when she met famed anthropologist Louis Leakey during a visit to Africa. He had long searched for someone to study wild chimpanzees for clues to the behavior of early man. "I want someone unbiased by academic learning, someone with uncommon patience and dedication." Jane Goodall fit his criteria to a T. Armed with only binoculars and a pad, in 1960, Jane Goodall set out to explore the chimpanzees deep in the African jungles in the Gombe Reserve in Tanzania. Sitting quietly in the same spot every day, always dressed in the same colors, never attempting to follow the chimps, they began to realize Jane Goodall was no threat to them. The chimps felt more and more comfortable with their encounters with Jane. After 6 months of exploring chimpanzees in Gombe, Jane Goodall encountered a chimp she named David Graybeard hunched over a termite nest digging for food using a twig. She saw David Graybeard take a twig, strip the leaves off of it, and carefully stick it into the nest to spoon out termites to eat. This was one of the most important scientific observations of modern times. She witnessed a creature other than a human make and use a tool. Before that time, the best definition of a human being was man the toolmaker. Upon learning of Goodall's discovery, her sponsor, Louis Leakey, said the following: "Now we must redefine man, redefine tools, or accept chimpanzees as humans."
Jane's discoveries in Gombe in 1960 were kind of pinnacle moments of redefining what it is to be human. The other huge discovery, which was the major groundbreaking, science is gonna rumble the scientific world, was that chimpanzees use and make tools.
Harvard paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould concludes this was one of the great achievements of 20th century scholarship. This discovery instantly made Jane Goodall a household name.
Miss Jane Goodall arrives in Tanzania. Her discoveries here will startle the scientific world, lead to the possible redefinition of the word man.
She became the most famous scientist in the world. Jane Goodall went on to spend 25 more years in the jungles of Gombe. There, she also discovered that chimpanzees eat and hunt for meat and have similar social behavior to that of humans. The worldwide fame Jane Goodall achieved as a scientist would help her greatly in the next phase of her life as an activist. In 1986, Jane Goodall attended a conference in Chicago that would change her life forever. During a session on conservation, she learned just how rapidly chimpanzee habitats and populations were being destroyed and that the illegal bushmeat trade was rampant. Goodall saw a video of the horrendous conditions in which the chimps lived at the medical research labs. Goodall went to Chicago as a research scientist and left as an activist. She knew at that moment it was time to give back to the chimpanzees who had given so much to her.
Why she became an activist, I suppose. She and a lot of other scientists who were studying chimps in the 1980s began to realize that chimpanzees were severely threatened by human expansion. And she also began to learn about the situation of chimpanzees in biomedical labs. So that's the moment when she decided to do something and become an activist. She left the scientific work and then just started traveling around the world and trying to raise awareness about the plight of chimpanzees.
Over the next 30 years, Jane Goodall would be on the road for over 300 days per year. She is giving speech after speech, exchanging her idea that we must do more to save the earth and our wildlife from man himself. Because of Jane Goodall's exchange with the public, millions of people around the world recognize that animals have personalities, minds, and feelings. Because of Jane Goodall's exchange with the leaders of African nations, chimpanzees are no longer on the verge of extinction. Because of Jane Goodall's exchange with U.S. political leaders, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Agency has designated captive chimpanzees as endangered, and the National Institute of Health ended medical testing on chimpanzees. These research chimps are owned by the federal government and intentionally infected with diseases like hepatitis or HIV for the sake of medical research. Recently, the National Institute of Health said these chimps were not needed for scientific studies. The agency's director, Dr. Francis Collins, promised to retire most of them to sanctuaries like this one, never to be experimented on again. But perhaps Jane Goodall's greatest exchange has been with other women. Jane Goodall's impact on women might be equal to her impact on science. Before Jane Goodall, the field of science was dominated by men, especially in the field of primatology. Gilbert Grosvenor, the former chairman of the National Geographic Society, said the following: Jane Goodall's trailblazing path for other women primatologists might be her greatest legacy. During the last third of the 20th century, Diane Fossey, Berute Galdikas, Cheryl Knott, Penny Patterson, and many women have followed her. Indeed, women now dominate long-term primate behavior studies worldwide.
Of course, Dr. Jane is a massive inspiration to women. She's a trailblazer. I mean, she went to Tanzania when she was in her early 20s. Was it early? She went to Tanzania when she was in her early 20s and lived in the middle of the woods with wild animals with no fear. That's fearless. And not only for women, for men, for presidents, for anyone.
I suppose if I had been a woman growing up and suddenly seeing this amazing person on television, I might have written a different book about Jane Goodall, the woman who changed women, instead of writing the book Jane Goodall, the woman who changed man, or who redefined man, I guess is the title.
In 1977, the Jane Goodall Institute was founded to support the continuing of research at Gombe to protect her beloved chimps and continue Jane's conservation efforts worldwide. In 1991, she founded Roots and Shoots as a way to recruit the youth of the world to carry on her conservation far into the future.
She started going around the world to speak to mostly young people, and in 1991 she formed Roots and Shoots, which was really geared towards young people to be proactive and really to empower them to come up with the solutions.
In 2002, Jane Goodall was appointed by Secretary General Kofi Annan as a United Nations Messenger of Peace. Currently, there are only 13 messengers of peace worldwide. In spite of the damage we have already done to the earth, Jane Goodall is optimistic that 30 years of exchanging her ideas and beliefs with the public will have a significant impact on how our society thinks and acts.
If we all lose hope, there is no hope. Without hope, people fall into apathy. There's still a lot left that's worth fighting for.
In fact, she states that there are 5 reasons of hope for the future: the unlimited power of the human brain, the resilience of nature to the havoc wrought upon it, the energy and enthusiasm that is found among young people worldwide, the indomitable human spirit, and the power of social media.
We do have the time left, but it does depend on us. We all have to get involved. We all have to make little decisions in our daily lives to leave lighter ecological footprints.
Jane Goodall explored new ways of looking at animals. Jane Goodall encountered chimps as no human had ever done before. Jane Goodall hopes that her exchange of ideas with mankind has a prominent effect on how we treat our planet. At 81 years old, Jane Goodall has no intention to ever stop delivering this message.